welcome to everybody to this webinar. So first point I want to make is that the Shared Space Program is something that I've had a relatively limited involvement in, so I'm presenting this on behalf of Auckland Council, which was really the brains behind the idea and put all the work in. It's not as if I did my day job Monday to Friday, then on the 6th day I went out and built a shared space, and 7th day I had a little lie down and then went out for brunch. So just wanted to make that point quite clear, that there are a whole bunch of other people who are very, very heavily involved in this project. So firstly, just a quick outline of the presentation. I'll start with a bit of context, both about New Zealand, Auckland and Auckland City Centre, and that'll be useful. I think most participants in this webinar are in Canada, and probably not a lot of them are particularly familiar with New Zealand, although I note that Tyler Golly is on, and he's currently visiting New Zealand from Edmonton and doing a bunch of work for us, so welcome Tyler. So then we'll talk about the catalysts and enablers of the program, give you a few case studies of it and the learning that we've achieved from it, and there are some learning to be had from the Shared Space Program. So firstly, where we are, we're Aotearoa, New Zealand. Aotearoa in Maori means the land of the long white cloud, and although some Indigenous activists in New Zealand would have it as the land of the wrong white crowd, given our history of European settlement since about the 1840s, population of 4.6 million, we're about outnumbered 7-to-1 by sheep, and approximately twice the size of Newfoundland. Just to give you a little bit of Canadian context around that. The city that I lived in my entire life, Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tamaki Makaurau is the Maori name for Auckland, and it means Tamaki of 100 lovers. And if you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, the central part of the region, which I am pointing to, the Auckland Isthmus, that is effectively a land bridge between Northland and the rest of North Island of New Zealand, and is obviously of great strategic significance because you can't get to the rest of New Zealand except for going through the Auckland Isthmus. So Ngāti Whātua, the Maori iwi or tribe of that area, were in quite a dominant strategic position because of their location on the Auckland Isthmus. A couple of things to be aware of: very strongly growing city. We're projected to, we're about 1.5 million, projected to grow to about 2 million. We have about 60% of New Zealand's population growth taking place in our city alone, and 80% of the working age population growth. And if you look at the little inset on the map on the left-hand side of the screen, that shows you the whole of the size of the Auckland Council area, which is closing in on 5,000 square kilometres, including the Great Barrier Island, which you see in the top right of the inset. That island doesn't yet have reticulated electricity, which shows the kind of diversity of our region. Probably the best analogy for Auckland would be Halifax region. Combining both local and regional levels of government, and also in terms of having a large rural hinterland. Our city at a glance, obviously kind of very dominant within New Zealand, in terms of port and airport. And if you can look in terms of how it relates to Canada, if you're coming from Canada, we're conveniently located on the way to Antarctica, which is down here. So we're the most remote developed country in the world, and that certainly has a shaping in terms of how we are and how we see the world. A little bit of an inferiority complex about ourselves, and a desire to kind of model ourselves on other cities, including cities like Vancouver around the Pacific Rim. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of how fast our city is growing, sort of looking at the medium growth projections or high growth projections. We've tended to beat the high growth projections, so we're dealing with problems of growth on a very significant scale. We have a vision to create the world's most livable city, and the Auckland Plan, which is the high-level strategic document for Auckland, is very much focused on that, and tends to have a very strong vision of Auckland in that role. In terms of what are considered the most livable cities, and you can have any sort of number of debates around the various sort of methodologies used to do that, the Mercer or Monocle or Economist, but Canadian cities, European cities, Australian cities, and Auckland, as well as Tokyo, that they appear in the top of those rankings. I think Auckland is, in 2016, is the top of number 3 in the Mercer ranking, and but that tends to be focused on quality of life, and that tends to be focused on, for example, for the Mercer survey, what sort of matters for expatriate employees who are based in a city. So, you need to take those quality of life measures with a grain of salt. For those who have been to Auckland and experienced it, it is a stunning physical environment. It's a very beautiful city. It sits on, basically, the Auckland region sits on 3 major harbours. It's about 50 or so volcanic cones, huge amount of parkland, sort of 80,000 hectares, just a stunning physical setting for a city. Unfortunately, the built form of our city does not do justice to its stunning physical setting. And we have a history of going down the standard post-Second World War II car-oriented development path, quite an extensive motorway network, including a motorway ring around 3 sides of our city centre. That's something that Vancouver and Edmonton and places like that managed to escape from, and all kudos to them for not going down that particular path. So this is it. What is Auckland? Is it a city of cars? I mean, our planning, by and large, in the post-World War II era through to about the year 2000 was pretty much about accommodating growth by expansion of the motorway and arterial road network, and that was a turning point when we moved our direction towards a more sustainable approach of a multimodal system. And if you think about that in terms of how Brent Todderan puts that continuum, we're still in that stage of kind of having our cake and eating it. We're still widening our motorway networks, but we're also doing good things with public transport and developing a cycling network pretty much from scratch and doing all of those other things. But we haven't made that final step to deciding that, all of the other modes should be, the absolute top priority. So a little bit about our city centre. These figures are actually a little bit out of date because things tend to move so fast in our city centre. So back in 2009, we had 24,000 people living in the city centre. As of today, it's around 40,000. We will well exceed the 2032 projection by a country mile. Around 60,000, actually currently around 65,000 tertiary students in the city centre, and closing in on 100,000 workers in the city centre. The city centre itself has a bunch of constraints that it needs to deal with. The first thing is the sheer amount of growth that is happening, and it's a strongly growing city centre, both in terms of employment, retail, tertiary student numbers, resident numbers. The motorway ring, which is, you can see this going around the edge here, really does tend to sever the city centre off from the surrounding urban villages. The fourth side of this is Quay Street, and coming along the Woodfront and Fanshawe Street, which are these major arterials which effectively cut the city centre off from the water in not a particularly desirable way. And obviously the growth in the transport network and transport demand is a key challenge. In the last 15 years, we've managed to accommodate the entire increase in demand to travel to the city centre by public transport, walking and cycling, and hold car volumes static. But to achieve what we need to achieve in the city centre through to the 2040s, we've got to do much better than that. We've actually got to significantly drop car volumes. We need to have a huge increase in the number of active trips, and we've got to more or less quintuple active trips, double public transport trips, and reduce car trips, just to keep the city centre moving at the level of mobility, or near immobility, one might say, in the peak that it's achieving at the moment. So following on from the Auckland plan came the City Centre Master Plan in 2012, and I regard this document as one of the great visionary documents, a highly visual, very easy to communicate document, which has a very strong vision for a very much better city centre than we've had in the past. And of note is that when we went through the public engagement process for this, we got 95% support, and I can't think of any public document that's gone through a process that's got, you know, that sort of level of support, and that's because the kind of vision that it had. I won't go through all of these moves, but these are the key transformational moves for the city centre. The first is the Harbour Edge Stitch, just reuniting the waterfront to the city centre by dealing with the severance of the major arterials and making them basically much nicer streets for people rather than just effectively traffic sewers for vehicles. The engine room, dealing with the core of the city centre, the City Rail Link, which is our underground rail link under the city centre, which is currently under construction, which will double the capacity of our public transport or our rail network coming into the city centre, and that's vital for meeting the increase in demand to travel. The Green Link, which I'll show you a little bit later, and one that's a particularly close to my heart, which is the city to the villages, which is trying to overcome some of the severance created by the motorway network between the city centre and the urban villages, and I live just on the other side of the motorway network from it, so I experience that every day when I walk and cycle. So I'm going to show you a couple of bits and pieces to give you a sense of, you know, why I think it's, you know, really necessary to have some big thinking, big ideas, and to be bold in your thinking and in your implementation. So you're looking at the Wynyard Quarter, and this is a brownfields regeneration area around 20 hectares immediately west of the core of the city centre. And this is what it looked like in around 2010. And it's a major public sector-led redevelopment project led by an organisation called Panuku Development Auckland, and in time for Rugby World Cup in 2011 it looked like this. So we wander back to what it looked like before, and if you have a look at the street that's running up and down your screen, Jellicoe Street, and see the change in the size of that street, changing it from a very wide street to a 20k an hour speed environment, a very people-focused street, a cobbled rough surface to encourage slow driving. So we've created this amazingly people-friendly space in time for Rugby World Cup 2011, which we of course won, and we won again in 2015, and we'll presumably win again in 2019 because the All Blacks are simply awesome. And kind of analogous to Canada winning hockey in the Winter Olympics in overtime, as I understand it, if you want a Canadian analogy for that. So another one, this is an idea that came directly out of the city centre master plan, and as a result of spending a fortune to try to upgrade what we call Spaghetti Junction, which is the web of motorways around the city centre and the connections between them. So that left us with a disused off-ramp, because we spent an awful lot of money to change a non-standard right-hand off-ramp to a standard left-hand off-ramps, given that we drive on the left in New Zealand. So we were left with this redundant piece of infrastructure. The city centre master plan had an idea to convert it into a cycleway, and this is what it looks like. So that vision is being converted into reality, and that only opened in December last year, and it's hard to think that that was only 7 months ago that happened, that things are happening at such speed in our fair city. It's the Sky Tower in rainbow colours. That was after the Orlando massacre. So this is another one. This is the current state of Victoria Street, which is an east-west street in the city centre, 6-lane cross-section. You know, not the most stunningly pleasant-looking environment. And this is the city centre master plan vision for the street as a green link with 1 lane of traffic in each direction, a linear park. So this also shows the strength of the vision, but it also shows that thinking can evolve quite rapidly, and practice can evolve quite rapidly. And for example, at that time, back in 2012, going into early 2013, the attitude to cycling was that we needed to create a 30-kilometre-an-hour environment in the city centre, and then in that environment, cyclists would be quite happy cycling, you know, mixed with general traffic, this kind of concept of vehicular cycling. And in 2013 and early 2014, we brought out Brent Todderan and Chris and Melissa Bruntlett because we wanted to change that conversation in our city. We wanted to change the conversation to understand that what Vancouver had achieved at that time with protected cycleways and creating a minimum grid of protected cycleways in the city centre was the way to go for our city centre. And, as a result of that, a general upping of a very quick upping of the practice around, what constitutes all ages and abilities cycling infrastructure. This linear park will include the east-west protected cycleway as part of the minimum grid of cycleways that were currently under construction in our city centre. So what I'm wanting to show with these is that it's okay to have really bold ideas, and but there are a whole bunch of things that you need to do to get those things to happen. And what often happens in planning is that you have documents that have, either very high-sounding principles, and sometimes they have big ideas, sometimes they don't. But having the big ideas and then making the big ideas happen is really important. It's really important to start making the big ideas happen relatively early in the life of the document, say within the first 1 to 3 year period, to demonstrate that you're actually serious about that this isn't some aspirational state for 30 years in the future, that somehow at year 27 you're just going to wake up from a lengthy slumber and somehow decide that in the final 3 years you're going to implement this entire vision. So get into the part of the presentation about what shared space is, what you're signed up for this to hear about this afternoon. So a shared space is basically a street with a single surface, gets rid of conventional curbs. Pedestrians have absolute priority in shared space, but are not meant to unduly obstruct to the harmonious flow of traffic. Gets rid of most of the conventional elements that clutter up streets, signage in particular, and road markings. And the whole idea behind it is that it becomes an interaction between different road user groups, between pedestrians, people on bikes, car drivers, that are required to make eye contact to interact with each other and kind of work out the space rather than have everything explained to them. And the more that you kind of create that ambiguity in the space, the lower the speed environment that you tend to have. And obviously, speed is, or as low a speed as possible is really crucial. So where is shared space? And having a look at our city centre. So I'm running my finger up and down Queen Street, which is our main retail high street through here. So it's a laneway circuit that's on the eastern and western side of Queen Street, generally narrower streets with a kind of a more intimate scale to them. The idea to create this network of pedestrian and shared spaces that are both run north-south through the city centre, but also a couple of east-west connections across Aotea Square through here, but also through the current Commercial Bay development, which is in through here, and through the Britomart precinct. So what are the enablers of shared space? Well, obviously money helps. There's a city centre targeted rate. A rate is just simply a New Zealand term for a property tax that is levied on city centre ratepayers on top of the normal rate, and that is intended to deliver a higher level of service to the city centre than would otherwise take place. And it also helps address the argument that the city centre is getting an excessive investment over other parts of the region, because in effect the city centre is actually paying for that itself. A couple of other points around the enablers: strong leadership. Auckland Council has a design champion in the form of Ludo Campbell-Reid. If your city doesn't have a design champion, I'd recommend that you go right out and get yourself one, because having somebody within your organisation that's a staff level champion of great urban design and great urban outcomes was a really important part of where we've got to in the city centre and creating a much better city centre for people. Clearly champions at the political level and informed decision makers at the political level, and ones that share and buy into the vision is really important, but also absolutely crucial to have hard-working and passionate staff, and the Auckland Design Office has that in spades. So this is the famous quote from Michael Bloomberg, and one that applies really well to the shared space program. As you'll see as we go through the presentation, in God we trust, all others must bring data. Counting is really important, and we tend to count what matters, and we're often really weak at counting people who are not in motorized vehicles, but pedestrians and people on bikes, and those are really important people to count. And so what I'm going to do now is just show you a bunch of before and afters of how shared space actually looks and feels and works in real life, to give you a sense of it. And this was a really important part of the process, was to actually record the before state. And if you don't record the before state, you can't really get a sense of what you've achieved with the after state, because it's so easy to forget what was there before. And particularly when that wasn't a long time ago. This is Elliott Street, which is a quite narrow, sort of intimate street. This was done as a conventional street upgrade in the late 1990s, with lots of bollards and narrowed up road carriageway and indented parking spaces, and that was thought to be the best practice of the time. And you can see the number of good service vehicles that are sort of trying to load in there at the time, and this is what it looks like now as a shared space conversion. At that time that we did this slide, there'd been a 10% increase in foot traffic. That increase in foot traffic is actually very substantially higher than that. One of the key things that you create with shared streets is the ability to spill out into the street to a much greater extent than you can do on a conventional street, particularly on a narrow conventional street. One of the other things that shared space achieves in that environment, if you go back to, is looking at all the vehicles sort of loading in. It actually becomes much easier for vehicles to load or unload in a shared space environment, because the parking is only for that purpose for 5 minutes only, from 7 to 11 in the morning. Doesn't tend to be perfect compliance with that rule, but certainly much easier for businesses to get their stuff in and out from there. So Smith & Co. is the department store that you see there, is this traditional old money department store of Auckland, very conservative, very fusty. They were very sceptical about shared space. They became rather less sceptical about shared space when their cash registers started ringing, with a significant increase in sales and a significantly improved environment for their shoppers to interface with the street. This is looking at Derby Street. This is a project that was actually underway prior to the creation of the Super City in 2010, when we amalgamated into a single municipality for the entire city region. This is what it looks like after, obviously very significant increase in foot traffic. The only signage we have in the shared space is the shared zone signs that you see in this slide. We designed them for a 10 km/h speed environment. They tend to be quite linear, and the longer ones we probably struggle a little bit with maintaining that sort of speed environment. And there's always a question of whether you'd want to put a bit more deflection into the shared spaces, some trees or planters or whatever that would require, reduce that linearity. So that's a consideration. Jean Batten Place, which is coming further towards downtown Auckland, that's a before and after. Obviously, there's fewer cars. The less is not grammatically correct, and at slower speeds. Fort Street a decade ago, and prior to Britomart Transport Centre bringing urban rail back to the core of our city centre in 2003, it's part of this very rundown part of downtown Auckland, and the whole area was really in very poor condition. This was the red light zone for the city centre, so lots of places to get lap dances and such like. Not at the high end of the economic value chain at the time, and this is what it looks like now. And it's been a huge increase in foot traffic. Obviously, a lot of stuff that's spilled out into the street. And if you go back, you can see that under the previous environment, that really wasn't possible to do that. So the only downstream effect of the that it's killed off the red light activity as it's moved to my neighbourhood, but well, you have to take with the good with the bad. This is Fort Lane. This is a very much a standard laneway where the undesirable things like rubbish and servicing vehicles and all sorts of stuff get dumped, and not a stunning environment. That's what it looks like after it got converted to shared space. It became something that was actually pedestrian enticing rather than kind of pedestrian repelling. And you're seeing in here, this is going into this place called Imperial Lane, which is a whole series of cafes and bars and eateries that spill out into the space, which would have been unimaginable in the previous context. We're just trialling at the moment in Fort Lane and a number of the other shared spaces, allowing two-way cycling and one-way shared spaces, so contraflow cycling. So that's just been implemented in the last week or so. So this is some data that came out of the post-evaluation survey that we did on the shared spaces in the Fort Street area. Everyone was basically pretty positive about it, and the big standout figure was the giant increase in hospitality spending. Even though you'd had a part of the hospitality in the red light district, you actually got a much higher value version of the hospitality industry. Lots of bars and restaurants and cafes. It's an environment where you actually want to sit out in the street and to just watch life go by and linger in that sort of environment. There's one statistic that isn't in here, which I think is important, that of all of the businesses and stakeholders and users that were surveyed, 100% of them agreed that there had been no impact on their access to the area. And that was important in terms of the political sellability of shared spaces. So like many big ideas, at the beginning there was a lot of skepticism about it. There was some sort of crazy idea that might work in Europe but could never possibly work in New Zealand because we're somehow very, very special and completely different from everywhere else on planet Earth. And in terms of political saleability to the City Centre Advisory Board, which decides on the spending of the City Centre targeted rate, on key City Centre stakeholders and business interests, it was really important to do that in a way that they could see sort of preserved car access to the spaces, and so it wasn't was seen as being both pro-pedestrian but not necessarily explicitly anti-car. One thing that I think has been a significant factor in its success, which probably hasn't been picked up as much as it may have been, is it coincided with Auckland Transport moving to a quite strategic approach to parking management in the city centre. So moving to demand-based pricing with periodic pricing reviews, and we're just going through one at the moment, that is aimed to get to 85% occupancy of parking spaces, so that basically 1 in 7 parking spaces are free at any given point in the city centre to reduce the cruising behaviour for parking. We also eliminated all time limits on parking in the city centre. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but by and large you can park as long in the city centre as you like, but we use escalator pricing to encourage short stay, more expensive for long stay, but if you're filthy rich you can just stay there all day if you so feel like. That was really important for getting all of the city centre business interests to support both our approach to parking management and our approach to shared space. We're kind of upping our game again in the parking management in terms of now we're about to introduce enabling people to remotely add on to their parking, and so that if you're having lunch and you want to have dessert and your parking times run out, that you can simply remotely add on to your parking electronically. And we think that will be helpful. The only thing that's not really worked for us with that is it's tanked our parking enforcement revenue, because compliance is so much higher than it used to be under the previous time restriction approach. So in summary, for shared spaces, foot traffic is up, spending is up, traffic volume's down, traffic speed's down, and really important to count all of those. As I showed in the Michael Bloomberg quote slide, all others must bring data, and we certainly did bring data, and that was really important for making the case. Talk about a couple of our more recent and more shared spaces. This is Federal Street in a before condition. This is on this side of the screen over here is Sky City, and Sky City is basically a development that takes an entire super block, well, an entire city block, and it constitutes the Sky Tower, Sky City Casino, convention centre, hotel, etc., etc. And so it had an incredibly blank relationship to the street. So Sky City was realizing that they had a perception issue that everyone associated their development with the casino, and a lot of higher income people associated the casino with lower income people who went there to lose lots of money on pokies, and therefore they weren't able to attract a high-end clientele to the restaurants in Sky City. So the solution really was that the Federal Street frontage, this frontage that you can see on the on both sides of the screen, because Sky City owned property on both sides, they wanted to basically bust out into the street and convert the street into a shared space, which was a shared vision with council. And they ended up paying 50% of the cost of the shared space upgrade. And as a result of that, the space has improved. It's kind of hard to see from this pic and from this pic, but there's a whole bunch, I think sort of maybe half a dozen or so restaurants and bars that have punched out into Federal Street, and it's helped calm, you know, one of the more challenging shared streets in terms of, if you look at the width of the street, it has a coach access function for the hotels and convention centres. It also has some parking accesses. So one of the more challenging streets to make work, but certainly on its way, still a work in progress. This is another one, which is O'Connell Street, and this is the prior condition. And one of the key things that we did with O'Connell Street, and was really important for us to do, was that we did this as, we did a pre-parking survey, because the business owners in O'Connell Street were convinced that those cars, all of themselves, were actually spending lots of money by themselves, sitting there kind of having a little sleep on the side of the street. So we did a parking survey there, and we discovered that the people who were, you know, parking there were actually spending their money somewhere else, and that the people who were spending money in O'Connell Street were either coming by walking or cycling or public transport, or they were parking somewhere else and walking there. So that was really crucial to get the O'Connell Street businesses over the line. And if you have a look at what it looks like post shared space conversion, you know, with the architectural uplighting of the, you know, some pretty amazing heritage buildings, but that was kind of hidden by the row of cars, so you really didn't get that sense of the, you know, how great those buildings are. So one of the key things about that is that it allows you the ability to activate the street, and this is an example of that. So O'Connell Street is one of the rare shared spaces that has no actual vehicle access function, and so over last summer, from October through to April, every Thursday, we had Thursdays on O'Connell, where from 12 noon to 8 p.m. The street was closed entirely and was, you know, activated with various activities, and, you know, and that was enormously successful. And it raises the question about, you know, at what point do you think, you know, is shared space some sort of interim step? Is the ultimate step you want to get to as, you know, a pedestrian space, maybe with some limited vehicle access time to load in and out? Okay, we'll talk about a few of the elements of you know, what makes shared space work, and coming close to the end of the presentation. So firstly, it's the right design, right choice of street, and the right context. And there are places where shared space can go bad. What's important is that there's either a pre-existing, you know, large number of pedestrians, or the potential to gain a large number of pedestrians within quite a short space of time. And the reason to do that is simply that if you don't have pedestrians able to own a shared space, then they become very nice streets, and the sort of car streets where Mercedes and BMW and Audi like to film their car commercials, you know, because they're basically urban car porn. So really important to have that, really important to have the right scale of the street, that the street really needs to frame up nicely to encourage that low speed environment, and really important that the physical environment is there and that the activation takes place. So for example, if you had a street like this where you didn't have the cafe table spilling out into the street, you know, that in itself, it takes ownership of quite a bit of the space and gives a clear cue to car drivers that this isn't an environment that you should be hurtling down with. Elliott Street, which is the street that you're seeing in the picture, has got a 10km/h speed limit. We're able to impose 10 km/h speed limits in New Zealand, so we designed for that sort of speed. So not every street will work as a shared space, so it's got to have those elements that come together. Remembering that constructing shared streets is incredibly disruptive, because not only are you touching the curb lines, you're actually getting rid of the curb line in its entirety and replacing it with an entire single level service. So it is a difficult time for businesses, but what's important is to use that time for businesses to do all of the work around what's going to happen in the post-construction period. And that's the work about getting working with the businesses to get them their street trading licenses, to get them their liquor licenses, to get them all of the stuff that they need to do, so that as soon as the construction's completed, that they can, one, occupy the space in the street, which helps achieve the shared space outcome, but they can also start to make some money, because inevitably having diggers right outside your business is both noisy and disruptive, and will have an impact. So maintaining access to businesses, supporting businesses through that process, through the construction impacts, but also kind of giving them a sense of there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that what's going to happen post is going to be really great, is really important to the process. Partnerships is really important, and that's the key part of the partnerships, is working with the businesses so that they take the maximum advantage of the opportunity presented by the shared spaces to improve their sales and to do all of that other stuff. Remembering that part of getting shared space to work is activating the space, particularly in the early phases of their implementation. So to encourage sort of people to be in new and often quite different spaces, and that can be anything from a public piano to activation events, to bits of programming, to whatever it might happen to be. But that's an important part of especially getting the new shared streets kicked off. And obviously really important to measure, count pedestrian movements, count the activities that are happening in the street. This really originated from the 2008-2009 Public Life Survey by Gal Architects, which frankly just bashed us around the head quite firmly about how poorly we were performing with the public realm and public space in the city centre, and the shared space program, and a bunch of the other stuff we're doing in the city centre was a direct response to the quite negative view that came out of the first Public Life Survey that we did. And that was an impetus for change in the city centre. The Public Life Survey's been redone in the last year or so, and is looking a lot more positive for the city centre, but still says that we have a ways to go to get to the place that we need to get to. So that's all from me. So I'll kick back to Gord.